Hey everyone, welcome back to my Substack. Today I'm going to break down some of my pros and cons of the new food pyramid. It's been a couple weeks since it was published or it came to light, and everyone has seen it by now. Everyone's probably heard 1,000 opinions on it, but I thought, rather than just leave my opinions to the side, I thought I'd put together a Substack and let you know what my thoughts are. Although they're probably really similar to what other dietitians have said. Um, but that said, I want to talk about this. I think it's an important topic. I'm going to start with the pros, because there are some pros. Let's be honest. The dietary guidelines, the food plate, it needed an update. It was ready for an update. The website, whenever I show clients the website, it was helpful and I like to use it for educational purposes. But it just was a little bit archaic. It was ready for a change. Now, that said, if you go through the new dietary guidelines or the new website, realfood.gov, they make a lot of mention of how the old food pyramid has ultra processed foods at the bottom, which is a little bit confusing because A, we haven't had a pyramid since the 1990s. It's been a plate for many decades. And B, when we did have a food pyramid, there were no ultra processed foods at the bottom. It was just grains. So what they're insinuating is that all grains are ultra processed, which I don't think is fair. Anyway, back to the pros. I like it's refreshed. It's been refreshed. It's updated. The colors are nice. That said, I do think AI put the website together, but we're sticking to the pros here. So trying to be positive. It looks nice and refreshing. Lots of color, lots of vibrancy. It looks like it's been updated, which it needed. I think the second, I guess, pro, if I can, I'm maybe stretching a little bit, is that there's just a little bit more detail so no one's going to actually go in and read the dietary guidelines. It's a 400-page document. I shouldn't say no one. Generally, healthcare providers, someone like me, a dietitian, will probably go through and scan the 400-page document. But a lay person, maybe like you, is probably not going to read through the nitty-gritty details of the 400-page document. That said, what you might look at is the website. And if you scroll through it, it does give some pretty, to the point specific guidelines, which I think is nice. For example, it gave a specific guideline for protein needs. Of course, I do wish they would have been a little bit more clear about how those protein suggestions, which I think they said 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, are really for the healthy individual. And that's a pretty wide range. So I would definitely suggest, as always, meeting with a dietitian to get more clear advice as far as, which side of the range you should fall or try to meet, whether you should go more towards 1.2 or 1.6 grams, or even if that's too much, because there's certain populations of people where that's too much. Maybe a guideline of 0.8 or 0.6 grams per kilogram would actually be healthier. So of course, they're not going to get into that detail just on that website, but just a point to make. Seeing a dietitian is always helpful. So they did have some more specific guidelines that you could just scroll through the website and see. But I have to bring in a con here. They also pointed out they pointed out the importance of meeting specific protein guidelines, but failed to mention how many grams of fiber we need, which I think is more important at this point. We're not getting enough fiber. That's a fact. All right. I threw in some cons there. I tried to come up with some pros. I did my best. So let's go to the cons. And I've got a list because there's several, and I want to make sure I'm giving you my complete list of ideas for cons. So I guess it starts with the fact that this website is now called realfood.gov. And I work with individuals trying to get them to see food as not healthy and unhealthy, good and bad. But I feel like this website is really painting the picture that anything that it does not come directly from an animal or directly from a plant, anything that has any added ingredients whatsoever is not real food. And I have a real problem with that because that just really perpetuates this black and white thinking that is not good for any of us. Do I think whole foods are best? Of course I do. But do I think that foods with some processing, maybe even some ultra processing and extra ingredients added are an important and realistic and sustainable way to get the nutrients we need as busy Americans? Yes, I do. So I don't love what they're calling it, realfood.gov, the absolute terms that they use throughout the document. I really have a problem with. Number two, going back to the real foods. It's making the assumption that Americans have the education and the resources, money, time, help to basically prepare all of our foods on our own with real foods. Because if we're only eating real foods, which I think is what they're meaning by that is whole foods, we have to know how to take those whole foods and put them into um, satisfying meals, not only for us, but for our kids. That takes education and that takes time and that takes money. So if you're going to tell us that we can only eat real foods or whole foods, give us some help. Throw us some some resources that you certainly have not given to us, especially certain populations. So I'm really struggling with this idea of telling Americans that they should only eat real foods. What are we supposed to do with that? Okay. All right. The pyramid itself reads from left to right, right? Because that's how we read. We read from left to right. And if you do that, it's the first image we see is a slab of meat. I have multiple issues with that, but I won't get too much into it. But essentially, it is saying that what they're saying is that protein is most important, but why not have a wide variety of protein sources showing, right? So they're basically just showing a chicken, a slab of steak, butter, and whole milk. I actually don't see in that pyramid in the protein section not one plant-based protein. If you go down that little strip, you'll see nuts and I think a picture of beans at the bottom, but I'm pretty sure that's supposed to indicate healthy fats. Now the beans, I'm not sure if they are even beans. I can't figure out what that picture is. But what I'm trying to say is they're making it very clear that animal proteins are more important than plant-based proteins, which I actually write a whole section about that in my book, if you're interested, Within Reach, which you can get on Amazon right now. So that's another issue. So we're reading from left to right and we see a slab of steak, which, by the way, is a probable carcinogen. Right after alcohol, it's alcohol, which is a carcinogen. And then steak or red meat consumption is listed as a probable carcinogen. Research has shown over and over that it is probably increasing our risk of cancer. And when I say probably, like highly probable, that's why they put that on the list. If you want to see that, you can go to the American Cancer Society website. So going from left to right, we see the meat, we see the high saturated fat proteins, and then we see fruits and vegetables. So they're basically putting saturated fat in front of fiber. That's how I see that. And research has shown over and over that a high saturated fat diet is linked to heart disease. And there's some good research to support that it may also be worsening insulin resistance. So anyway, moving on. It's the literal opposite of two gold standard diets that research for decades has shown are the best diets to prevent chronic disease. And that is the DASH diet, Dietary Approaches to Stopping Hypertension. You can look that up. And the Mediterranean diet. It is quite literally the opposite of both of those. I already mentioned that it gives a protein recommendation, but not a fiber recommendation, which, by the way, I usually say to my clients, aim for 25 at minimum. 35 would be much better, especially for men. Men need a little bit more because they need more calories, generally, not always. Oh, yes, my favorite part. As you scroll through the lovely website, it makes it very clear that there is absolutely no room for added sugars. 0 added sugars. If you think about that, it is virtually impossible to do that. Again, without resources, money, time, education, to be able to make every single thing that you eat from scratch. There's added sugars in bread. there's added sugars in yogurt. So I guess they want us, and I think they did say in the document, to just eat plain yogurt all the time. And don't think about putting granola on top of that plain yogurt because granola has added sugar. So plain yogurt with oats and berries. Not such a bad idea, but that's not the problem. The problem is that by giving an absolute recommendation, like do not include any added sugars in your diet, is just not helpful, realistic, or sustainable. Not to mention, if they're going to make a statement like that, then let's give some more subsidies to the National School Lunch Program, for example. Because I'll tell you right now, I volunteer at my kids' school. There's plenty of added sugar in those meals. So, what are you going to do about that? You can't make statements like this without the follow up support. I think that's it. I'm sure I could go on for decades, I should say hours, about my issues that I have with this realfood.gov, this new pyramid, but I'm just going to end it there. And I would love to hear your feedback. What are your thoughts on the new pyramid, the new website? Will you follow these guidelines or will you just stick to what you've been doing? Do you need extra help learning what to eat? Because I would love to meet with you. I take insurance through Nourish, and I also have my own business, Nutrition Unmeasured LLC, which I don't take insurance through, but I'm happy to meet you where you're at financially. All right. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.